Welcome to Focus on Why. I'm Amy Rowlandson, your host. Join me to explore the compelling stories, profound insights, and captivating experiences shared by my guests from all over the world. Focusing on the importance of why, these relatable, uplifting, and inspiring conversations will empower, motivate, and guide you to create your own purposeful way of life. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we dive in, let me share how I can transform your journey as a purpose coach. I specialize in helping you get crystal clear on your why, aligning your passion with your purpose, and crafting a plan to create the life you truly desire. Book a free 30-minute coaching call today. The link is in the show notes. Let's start building your purposeful future together. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Manda Scott, who was very kindly introduced to me by my previous guest from episode 401, Nicola Peel.
And Nicola is particularly well connected. Thank you, Nicola. If you're listening, that's grand. Very grateful.
So I wonder, what is it that you're focusing on at the moment, Manda?
So I just launched a novel called Any Human Power, which is a thrutopian thriller. I am also calling it a mytho-political thriller. And in the wake of that coming out, it's becoming clear to me that we can begin to create this into a genre, which is what I was hoping we would do. And it does seem to be gaining momentum. That within the writing world, people write dystopias. And really, I'm beyond patient with that now, because we don't need any more visions of how bad it could be if the worst of humanity crashed forward. And people write utopias, which is lovely, but you can never see how to get there. They're a different timeline or a different planet, or something miraculous has happened that you never quite see, and everybody thinks like I do, whoever I am. But what we are lacking are the thrutopias that take us from exactly where we are to where we could be if we were to craft a future based on basically the disintegrating rubble of the existing paradigm, to create something that we would be proud to leave to our generations that come after us. So really, the question is, how do we become the best ancestors we can be? And that's at the core of everything I'm doing. And what I'm realizing is that this is a narrative quest, but it's predicated on an inner quest. We have to establish the value system that could carry us forward to that. Everything else hinges on that. And how do we do that? So really, examining what is the existing value system, and then what could take us forward into a value system that would actually allow us to flourish within a flourishing biosphere. That is my focus at the moment.
Wow. Okay, right. Let's go there because this is something that I have yet to explore with a guest, and I'm very excited, Manda. This is a really new space. Not the imagining or the co-creating or the dreaming into a future. That absolutely we've talked about, but in the way that you've described it, and also in this vision or quest that you describe about it being a narrative, but also an inner quest. Explain to me and the listener what it is that this existing value system that we have, what parts would you like to move forward with?
That's a very interesting question. Okay, so this is what I have in my head now is the 3 horizons model. I don't know if your listeners are familiar, but basically you draw a graph, the standard X and Y axis, and you put 3 overlapping peaks on it. And H1, the first horizon, is what's here now. H3 is where you want to get to, and H2 is the one in the middle. And then you split H2 down the center so that it's a single peak and you've got a line right bisecting it. And there's the bits that are dragging you back to the old horizon, the old paradigm, and the bits that are moving you forward to the new. And I am seeing sparkles of what we would call Horizon 2 going forward. Indy Johar calls it the interbecoming. And I would say that we're looking at the emergent edge of interbecoming. And it seems to be predicated on people who have the capacity to accept that the current system is dying and cannot continue. And that's quite a hard thing to do. When we ran the thrutopian masterclass, we had a lot of people. We ran it over 6 months, every alternate Sunday, couple of hours. First hour was somebody come and talk to us about how politics could be different, or economics, or urban design, or transport, or food and farming, whatever. And then the second hour was, okay, how do we integrate that into our writing? This was a writing masterclass, not to teach people how to write, but to teach them what they could write of the ways forward. And so we had a self-selecting group of people who wanted to do that and who were already aware that this was necessary. But even so, the dismantling of the existing paradigm took a lot of time, and still does, because we exist within it. The value system that we live with, I think I'm very shaped at the moment by Francis Weller's concept of the initiation culture and the trauma culture. And the initiation culture is what we evolved with 300,000 years of human existence and all of the indigenous cultures worldwide that still hold to this. And an initiation culture, in his framing, individuals go through intermittent, episodic, contained encounters with death, during which they are pushed to the edges. It's an encounter with death. You find where your boundaries and limits are. And yet, because you exist within what I would call a serotonin mesh culture, you have the sense of yourself as part of something bigger, as part of a tribe, as part of the web of life, the bigger expanse of the more than human world. And you have the capacity to ask for help from the elders who are holding the containment, and the tribe who are holding the containment, and the land which is holding the containment, and the more than human world. And in some cultures, also the ancestors, if that has been set up. And then if you survive, and survival is not guaranteed, you come back with the capacity to ask for help and hear the answers. You come back with the capacity to accept help from each of those, the elders, the tribe, the land, the more than human world, the ancestors, and to thrive and to bring your understanding of that back into your serotonin culture. Somewhere around 10, 12,000 years ago, at a part of the world, Fertile Crescent, that understanding of self as part of something greater was severed. And now we have a trauma culture within which you and I exist, where we don't have contained encounters with death that enable us to grow. Broadly, we have stacking traumas, where our sense of isolation, of scarcity, separation, and powerlessness, that is the value system that underpins what I would call the predatory capital death cult, is guaranteed to keep us separate. We don't know how to ask for help of the land, of the elders, of the more than human world. And we don't have ancestors who know how to give us help. So that's a bit of a generalization. I'd let that one drop because it is a way generalization. But the rest, we need to move. So my question is, if we are in a trauma culture where we have stacking traumas, which I believe is self-evident, how do we move to an initiation culture where we can find that sense of containment and connection and find ways to ask for help of a web that we trust, a web of communities of place and purpose and passion, a web of elders who we consider to actually be wise, and the more than human world. And then integral to that becomes a value system that is predicated not on scarcity, separation, and powerlessness, but on agency and sufficiency and connection. And within that, I promise I'll stop speaking in a moment, but part of the structure I have in my head of that is very broadly, and any neurophysiologists listening, please, I am aware that this is the billiard ball theory of physics rather than the string theory of physics, but it'll do for now. We have broadly two reward circuits within our physiology, and one of them is dopamine-based and one of them is serotonin-based. And dopamine-based circuits are short-term, diminishing. They are subject to the law of diminishing returns, and they are in no way self-reinforcing. So cocaine, pornography, righteous outrage. The My Tribe was right on Twitter. Again, I managed to throw out a few tweets, really lambasting the other side, and yay, I believe they landed. Gives us the same dopamine hit as cocaine, and is one of the reasons our social media are so toxic. But I need more cocaine, or more alcohol, or more extreme pornography, or more hits on Twitter to get the same dopamine spike. And when it's spiked, it's gone. So we're anaesthetizing ourselves with extra dopamine. Nate Higgins, of the Great Simplification, says our culture is basically revolving around turning barrels of oil into microliters of dopamine. That's what we do. And that's extremely destructive and doesn't stop. It's voracious. We have an economy that has to grow regardless of its impact on people and planet. Serotonin reward centers are self-reinforcing and they're enduring and they do not have the diminishing returns. It's much more of a mesh. It's not little isolated dopamine spikes. Serotonin is a network and a mesh. And it doesn't take much to keep it topped up. I did the Masters in Regenerative Economics at Schumacher in 2016-17, and two of my best friends there were Jewish people who had grown up on a kibbutz. And they said the kibbutzes that survived were the ones that ate together once a week, minimum. They obviously, lots of them ate together more often than that. But if you eat together once a week, particularly if you sit in a circle afterwards and sing or share stories or do the things that we evolved to do, then the serotonin mesh, is maintained enough. And in genuine tribal cultures, everything the entire tribe does is part of a song and a dance and a rhythm and a pattern. And so there's a continual from the moment a child is born into the cherishment of holding. They're part of that pattern. And I believe we are all born expecting that. And then we have the crashing catastrophe of our culture, which doesn't offer that at all. And we spend the rest of our lives trying to get dopamine hits to fill the void inside. And it's never going to work. So, how can we heal inside enough to create the good enough ancestors that we want to be for the generations who will come after us, the generations not yet born? And that quest is just completely all consuming at the moment. I don't pretend to have answers, but I can see flickering edges of answers in some of the extraordinary work that is being done around the planet.
Amanda, this is something that is probably at the root of every conversation I have. And yet it hasn't actually been formally identified as what you've presented today. This disconnection, this uh, inability to connect, to come together, the difficulty between a paradigm where we are celebrating individualism and not bringing together community in the way that you've described it happened before, and this being born to expecting something that then we spend our lifetimes not being able to put a finger on and describe, but this is it. This is what we're lacking. Now, you said 10 to 12,000 years ago that this was severed, this connection, this ability to feel that you are something, a part of something bigger. Was there a particular event that happened during that period? Do we know?
No, no, and I don't know that we ever will. Although that's depending on who you believe. It's 10 to 12,000 years ago. It's a very fluid area of research. It was the start of, in the West, our Western, what is now, I think Jonathan Haidt calls it the Western educated, industrial, rich, notionally democratic cultures, basically weird, completely unlike anything else on the planet. That was when we started agriculture. And our form of agriculture cannot exist if you understand yourself to be part of the web of life, because it is innately hierarchical and destructive. And undoubtedly, indigenous peoples across the planet have had forms of land management. We now know that the Australias were a managed landscape when Cook arrived. The Amazon was a managed landscape. North America, there was a lot of management in the landscape, but it was management with the landscape. It wasn't, I own this field and I will defend it to the death from other people, other animals, whatever. I will sow monocultures on it. I will destroy everything else. Industrial agriculture is the end point of a 10 to 12,000 year evolution, but it didn't start, when we discovered that we could turn oil into food. It started a long, long time ago, and the mindset that goes with it started then. There was a lot of stuff around then. There was a great lake whose name I have forgotten. Well, it wasn't a lake, it was a glacier in North America, which then melted and became a huge, 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 huge lake, which then breached and flooded into the sea and created uh, a significant and very rapid change in climate. And up until then, the Fertile Crescent, as I understand it, had been basically there were 16 types of grain growing as far as the eye could see. There were antelopes, there were figs literally dropping off the trees all year round. And a forager hunter culture had become more sedentary. And as soon as they become more sedentary, women have start their cycles sooner. Girls reach puberty earlier, and more children are possible. When a woman is in forager hunter communities where they are nomadic, puberty happens in women around 18, and there's quite a long gap between kids because carrying children seems to reduce fertility. And so this concept that we'd still have 20 kids back then is just not true. They weren't having that many children. But once we settled, because there was fertility in the land where it was possible to become more sedentary, the skills of forager hunting were lost. And it seems we have, certainly I grew up with the narrative that farming was progress. And actually farming seems to have been a very unwilling default. It didn't spread fast. There's a really interesting book called Civilized to Death by Christopher Ryan, where he details this. It's a fascinating read. It's much smaller than The Dawn of Everything, which is definitely the key on this. That's David Graeber and David Wengrow. Definitely read that. But Civilized to Death is quite short. And he says every other technology that we'd really valued spread really fast, like beaker technology or how to chip a hand axe better, right across the known world. Agriculture spread at the speed of an old man in carpet slippers. And in Britain, we know from Graeber and Wengrow, agriculture was taken up for 2 or 3 generations and then stopped for several hundred years. And we went back to foraging hazelnuts as our main source of winter protein carbohydrate because nobody liked doing it. It wasn't fun. Forager hunter lifestyles are essentially relaxed, and people spend most of their time in ceremony and song and community. Once you start farming, you're farming from dawn till dusk, and it's very, very hard work, and nobody really enjoys it. So not in the way that we enjoy the life of the nomadic tribes. So we don't know exactly, and it may have been that climatic event, because at the same time our gods stopped being gods of abundance and started becoming vengeful and jealous and patriarchal and only supported the people who sacrificed stuff to them. All of the kind of psychopathies of our trauma culture religions arose and have been perpetuated since then.
And I can't avoid this link to the trauma that you're referencing here, because it is, and right from the beginning, from when you talk about the three horizons model, the horizon 2 you described, which has an element of being dragged back and moving forward. You've got this flux of motivation of what is driving and pushing people to move forward or to cling on to what's past. Now, this, I'm not going to be reductionist here, but I'm really keen to understand the role that trauma has played in preventing us from living here.
I think so. I would frame that as what have we lost? And we've lost the connection to the web of life. So most of my spiritual work, I teach what we call loosely shamanic dreaming, but it's contemporary connecting to the web of life. How can we connect to the web of life? Whatever we want to call that is, I think it's our birthright, and I think it's still possible. I know it's possible. And so I think that sense, if we exist in a dopamine culture, we have that constant sense of lack that it doesn't matter how many boxes we get from Amazon, how many private jets we buy for ourselves, how many rockets we send to Mars, we're not going to fill the holes inside. If we begin to evolve the serotonin mesh of connection to other people, to ourselves, first of all, create that sense of connectedness inside, connection to other people, communities of place, purpose, and passion, and connect to the web of life, the more than human world, then I can ask for help. And that help will be given, is absolutely my experience. And I need to learn how to ask for help in a way that is authentic and grounded and not head-based and comes from what I would call heart mind. And so the trauma for me is the trauma of not knowing that it's possible to ask for help and not knowing how. However, I think we don't have to, I think languishing in our trauma is not a useful thing. We acknowledge it, we look at it, and then the concept of post-traumatic growth is a thing. We are the inheritors of, let's say, we in the West. When I go on Ancestry, which I've only done once, but basically my ancestors came from Scotland, except for 8% who came from Scandinavia, which was, the Viking insurgency or incursion in, the 13th century. That was it, for a very long time, and so I am an inheritor. In the islands of Britain, we are the inheritors of trauma that probably arrived with the Romans 2,000 years ago, but the Romans didn't invent it. They were as traumatized as anybody else, but then we exported it. The native peoples of North America, of Turtle Island, had a concept of the Wendigo or the Wetico, which was an entity that they only saw when people had been trapped away from the tribe by snow or something, and maybe only 2 or 3 survived, and they survived by eating the others. And they would come back and they would be infected by this darkness, and there were very sophisticated social technologies to help that person heal so that they were safe to let back in the tribe, because otherwise there was a potential of contagion, and that was the worst thing that could happen. And then our culture arrived on their shores, and they met an entire culture that was infected with the Wetico, and they had no idea what to do with that. And we have successfully exported our trauma all around the world. And yet, we didn't invent it. It's 10,000 years is many, 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 many generations. If it is given us, we know we're in a moment of total transition. We're in the polycrisis. Everything is critical at once, and we don't know where the tipping points are. But we also don't know where the tipping points are where enough of us get together and heal. And that ripples out. And healing becomes easier and more possible because we can offer guidance. And so we can either wallow in our trauma, and where we're probably in the H2, if not the H1, the falling back into the old paradigm, or we can accept this is where I am, and I will, every moment of every day, do what I can to be healed and whole and connected to the web of life, and ask it, what do you want of me? And assume that it is a hyper complex system that has answers that my head mind does not. Because part of the trauma of our culture is this hegemony of head mind, where we think that everything is complicated, and if I pull lever A, I can create event B. And the only thing we can say about that is that the law of unintended consequences will apply. Please do not do geoengineering, because it will not work, and it's probably irreversible. And it's a really weird, I'm trying to think of a word that doesn't begin with F, head mess, that and a hubris and an arrogance that says we understand what's going on, and of course we don't. That's the nature of complex systems. We can't. But the web is a complex system, and if we can hook into that with our heart minds, then we have the potential of living as one node in a super hyper complex mesh and being what it needs of us. So that for me is where I think the healing lies, and that focusing on that possibility is really important. Did that make sense?
It does. And what I'm hearing is that there have been Indigenous people who've understood this, and yet it has been overwhelmed. And as you said, it's been exported across and now has been so diluted in terms of it's just become the norm as opposed to not needing to be the norm. And you've mentioned a couple of times now this place, purpose, and passion, those elements coming together. Can you explain a little bit more about, obviously, purpose as a piece here, but what their roles are in this paradigm that you would love us to move towards?
Okay. In the evolution of consciousness, really. So for it's 64 million years since the last mass extinction. We are now in another one. But in those 64 million years, we are the descendants of the 3 to 5% of species that survived that. And for all of that time, our communities have been the communities that we could reach by whatever method of locomotion we could gain access to. And for most of human history, that was walking. Eventually we got around to riding horses, and then we evolved faster things. Um, but our communities of place remain really important, particularly, I would say, as we move towards a different way of living where the six continent just-in-time supply chain cannot be sustained. So I'm going to need, for instance, to eat food that has been grown within reasonably easy, at least cycling distance of where I live. And I want my fuel and my fiber and probably my building materials to be within the location. And I need, therefore, to have my communities of place. But we have invented the internet in terms of communication it makes of our hive mind a hypercomplex system. And so I'm not limited by the Dunbar number of people that I can connect to by actually going and talking to them. I can connect to Amy, and we could create a community of purpose, our shared purpose around podcasting and putting things out in the world. I can also have communities of passion, of the things that really inspire me, say dog behavior. The new trauma-informed dog training I find completely inspiring. And so I have communities of people that I have never met in person. They are not within walking distance, but they feel like my tribe. And so the possibility exists now that I can have many overlapping communities of purpose or passion, and as well as my community of place. And so the Venn diagram of my communities becomes much more complex. And the one thing that is at the center of all the overlapping Venn spaces is me. And there might be a lot of other people that are in those overlapping spaces, but there's at least me. And so that massively, actually exponentially, in the genuine term use of the term exponential, increases my capacity for connectivity, and therefore the serotonin meshes, the expansiveness of those that I can inhabit and from which I can ask for help and where I can share ideas. I think as we move into a new culture, and one that will survive the collapse of the sixth continent just-in-time supply chain, the things that we will share are the ideas and the inspirations, those things that are at the emergent edge of into becoming. Whereas my food, my fiber, my fuel, my capacity to build are likely to remain much more static.
And this into becoming, is it into or inter?
Inter, I-N-T-E-R, inter becoming. So that was Thich Nhat Hanh talked about interbeing, but Indy Johar of Dr. Martin Labs talks about interbecoming as where we need to be, because he's exploring that liminal edge between systems, that we're back at Ilya Prigogine and the concept that when a system reaches maximal complexity, it has two paths. It either crashes into extinction or it emerges into a new system. And the new system is not predictable from the old system. If you can predict anything about the new system, it isn't a new system. It's just just painted the wheels on the bus a different color, when in fact the bus needs to be a unicorn. So in the transition from a bus to a unicorn, the people who are at the edges of busness are the people most likely to be laying a foundation for emergence into something that we cannot see or cannot predict and can't say what it will look like. But I think we can establish the value system. This is, we've looped back to value systems. That if we have value systems in which we really value integrity, compassion, connectedness, the capacity to ask for help with the web of life, then that is more likely to take us into emergence to a new system than to crashing into extinction.
And you mentioned that we're on this or in this, it's hard to define on or in terms of being in this liminal edge between systems. And from what I know, that state of being in a liminal area is the unknown, and you said that we won't ever know. So or it's a case of we can't understand. We and to let go of that not understanding
Yes.
is the difficulty here in the need to know, the need to understand. And this is the same with life and the meaning of life and why are we here and all of those questions, those sort of existential questions that we have. It links in with the trauma that is
Yes, it
stacking and
does.
yeah. Tell me a bit more.
Because if you talk to Indigenous peoples, they don't have those existential questions. They just connect to the web and they know why they're here. That sense of being and becoming and belonging is integral to who they are. And being, becoming, and belonging, every bit of neuroscience that I've seen is those are essential to a sense of fulfillment. And so we're back to how can we have the post-traumatic growth? How can we accept that those are the things that we yearn for, and that we've substituted money, basically, and stuff for a sense of being, becoming, and belonging, and it isn't ever going to achieve that. So what happens if we let go of those existential questions and instead connect to our heart mind? Let our head mind. So I don't want to be too esoteric for your listeners, but in the way that I would shape things, we have our head minds, our heart minds, and our body minds. And our culture basically gives hegemony to our head mind and ignores everything else. We don't even listen to our body mind until it's actually disintegrating in front of us, and then we panic. What happens if we give our head minds a break and stop this idea that we have to have all the answers? And stop asking why and what can I have and when can I get it? And instead ask, how do I connect? And we ask that from our heart minds. And we stop and we listen to the answers. And that requires a degree of inner space. I was talking recently to Jamie Bristow of the Inner Development Goals. And he's just written an amazing, big paper for the Club of Rome. So people are getting this at quite high levels within our existing paradigm. That we need the space inside to just stop and trust and listen. And we need to evolve the ears of our heart mind such that we can hear the rest of the web of the life through the cacophony of modern existence. And that's not easy, but it is possible. I guarantee you it's possible. Um, so that really, this is part of our growth, I think, is understanding that the answers are not lying in our heads and giving our heads a break. At the point when my students get to the point where they really feel at a deep in their marrow that they can trust their heart mind, and our head is not there then to work out what I need to do. My heart mind connects to the web and asks, what do you want of me? And then my head mind is there to work out how to do it. That's what it's for. That's what it's really good at. So if I go up the hill here and I ask those questions, and what seems to come is you need to write this particular kind of book that you've never written before, and anyway you thought you were stopped writing, but no, you haven't. Just write this book. Then it's up to my head mind to work out how to do it. And it's much easier. My head mind can relax a lot more. It doesn't have to answer those fundamental questions.
I'm hearing here, Amanda, lots of elements that have three parts to them. The three horizons model, the place, purpose, and passion, the integrity, compassion, and connectedness, the heart, head, and body minds. And I'm taking it right back to the management of landscape, and it was managed with landscape. And this ownership mindset that formed with agriculture of defending it to the death and as you said, the reference the book Civilized to Death, and this whole need to move, well, the moving from abundance to vengeful, that whole shift that happened there, those elements of three parts and three ways here, and bringing together all of these different pieces that we can adopt. You just said stop, trust, and listen. Again, another three element there. And I can't help but think that the time that we were given in the global pandemic was an opportunity for us to stop, to trust and listen to what the landscape was creating for us. And at the time, we did. We did take that time to stop, to trust and listen. And there was a whole split of people who wanted it to go back to how it was, and then there was people who were actually, this can be an opportunity to do something different, to think about things differently. What are your reflections on this thought, or this piece that I've just sort of brought together from what you've shared?
Wow. That's a whole other podcast. Um, so I think the thing we have to acknowledge is that those of us who had the privilege to stop were able to stop. That a lot of people didn't actually, and that was a very our hierarchical culture. It was the people that are not well paid were the ones who had to keep working. So and the rest of us basically had a couple of years off. It didn't feel like that from here. Actually, I started teaching online, and it just took up a lot more time. But but I still was enormously privileged, and I live on the edge of a hill, and I had the freedom to go up the hill every morning, and I was taking videos up the hill and posting them on Facebook for the people who were stuck in town. So it wasn't all unicorns skipping through the roses for all of us. However, you're right, it was a chance to reset. And there were a number of us that were quite excited because when I was at Schumacher, we had this metaphor that what we're trying to do is take a Boeing 747, that was before Boeing 747s started falling out of the sky, and turn it into a helicopter in mid-flight. And that's really hard. And you're trying to do it without killing anyone. And then the 747 landed. Like, okay, guys, now we turn it into a helicopter. It just stopped. The global economy just stopped. And and then it was kickstarted again by the people who didn't like the fact that it just stopped. Because partly, I think, there's a lot of narratives. I am a pretty much a dyed-in-the-wool modern monetary theorist now, and I think there's a set of falsehoods we are taught about money. This whole thing of there isn't enough money in the coffers. The government makes the expletive-deleted money. It is its job to keep the money supply flowing because otherwise everybody has to take out more personal loans and then the economy has to grow because the banks are charging, say, 5%. If the economy doesn't grow by 5%, they default on the loans. Lo and behold, another global financial crash. The government makes the money. And oh no, inflation. No, I'm sorry. Inflation only happens when there is a disparity between supply and demand. And at the moment, the inflation is happening because the fossil fuel companies are price gouging us, and fossil fuels are at the base of everything. And they looked at the quantitative easing, otherwise known as helicopter money, that the government did during COVID, and they went, yeah, we'll have that, thanks. And they just kicked up all their prices. The prices were going up before Russia invaded Ukraine. So we're being sold a bunch of absolute nonsense about how money works. Henry Ford, who was a white supremacist, once said that if the average man understood the nature of money and how it was created, we would have pitchforks on the streets within a day. And so the narrative of the way that the economy functions was under threat. And that was, you could watch the panic in the eyes of the people. And I think, the people who were at the front, the people who are at the head of government are the puppets. I think they really believe it. I don't think they genuinely don't understand how money works, but the people behind them definitely do. So I think that would have been a really useful turning point. And the problem is there's a concept that the Hayek, the Chicago School knew, which is when there is a crisis, people will pick up the ideas that are lying around. We will make sure our ideas are those lying around. And those of us who would like the world to be different didn't have the ideas lying around in a place where the people who were panicking were likely to pick them up. And so we lost that opportunity, frankly. And now we need new opportunities. And we're watching the world burn because the people currently in charge don't care that it's burning. And some of them don't even believe that it's burning, which is extraordinary given the actual evidence in front of our eyes. So changing the narrative, we're back to the beginning of how do we change the narrative? We have a media infrastructure that is wholly owned by very few people who are completely committed to maintaining the old paradigm and maintaining the narrative of scarcity, separation, and powerlessness. How do we create the different narratives? And partly we would create new media systems, which is happening. There's Byline Times and Double Down News and Navarre Media just in the UK. But more, what happens? What would happen if we woke up tomorrow and every good writer on the planet of novels, of nonfiction, of movie scripts, of television blockbusters was writing fiction and nonfiction with a thrutopian basis? And the thrutopian basis is the existing system is dying. A different system is possible. Here are the values of the different system: integrity, connection, compassion. And here are actual routes through from the crumbling edifice that is around us to this future where we feel that we've been good ancestors. Let's do it, guys. If if the Netflix or Amazon or Hollywood producers could not get any old style scripts that are basically propaganda for a dying system. They are the H1 concepts. If they couldn't get a Bond script or the new Marvel movie or the new Game of Thrones, except that it was predicated on these new sets of values, they would have to make them. And overnight, our system would change. There are things that people could do in business. There's one thing in the book that I picked up. There's people called River Simple, and they make hydrogen fuel cell cars. They're in Wales, not far from where I am. And the fuel cell cars are interesting. But the really interesting thing is that they have what they call a global guardian governance model. And so they do have investors, but their investors only have one seat on a board, where the other seats are held by the workers, the local community to the factory, the environment, the customers, and the supply chain. And in the book, I put in, and also somebody sitting for future generations. And that group of people sets the value system and the way of working for the company. And imagine if everybody woke up tomorrow and every company had a global guardian governance system on board. Imagine being a worker and you live close, so you have two voices on the board, and you have transparency of the meetings. So the person that you've sent to represent you is not actually representing you very well. You have absolute right of recall, and you can pick somebody else until you get someone who does represent what you want. And I would put in help with, say, sociocratic means of deciding what it is that you all want as workers or as the local community, or speaking on behalf of the environment. It would transform the nature of business. Business does not have to be extractive, destructive, and polluting. It is, because at the moment its only value system is to create more value for the people at the top. But it doesn't have to be that.
It doesn't. And as you said, there have been elements within this particular episode here, Manda, that would be a whole new podcast episode in themselves. There's been so much. I feel like I've barely given any of the elements enough attention, and I hope that what I have done is bring what you've shared today to the forefront of the minds of the listener, so much so that they would want to reach out and connect with you and find out more. And how will they do that best?
Okay, well, I think everything will be in the show notes. If you want to read the book, it's called Any Human Power, and it is basically is my manifesto. It's fiction and it's a thriller, but it's got everything woven through. The podcast is Accidental Gods, and you will find me at Manda Scott, all one word, all lowercase, .co.uk, or Accidental Gods, all one word, all lowercase, .life. But it's in the show notes. Go for it.
It is indeed. Manda, thank you so much for
Thank you.
your incredible share today. It really has been a fascinating conversation, of which I am, my mind is already being pulled in so many different ways, as is my heart, as is my body, in terms of what is it I'm going to be reflecting and acting upon as a result of this conversation, because it cannot be ignored, is where I'm thinking right now and where I'm feeling for sure.
Thank
Manda,
you.
yeah, thank you. No, thank you. Do you have some final words, please?
Well, a thank you would be the first one. And for anybody listening, this is our birthright. We deserve better than we have been given. And the generations that come after us, I want to be able to do an imaginary journey 7 generations down the line, look into the eyes of the people who live then and go, did we make it? And for them to go, yes, we are so proud of what you did, because it was right at the edge and everything was looking really bad and left it way too late. But when it actually mattered, you all got together and you brought the extraordinary creativity of humanity to bear on veering the bus away from the edge of the cliff. We can still do this. And I really want that sense of having been a good enough ancestor.
What value have you gained from tuning into Focus on Why today? What are your reflections with actions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or via LinkedIn and share how Focus on Why has made a difference to you. Your feedback not only will inspire others, but will help them to discover how Focus on Why has created powerful ripple effects. Let's continue the conversation. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or X, join the Focus on Why Facebook group, and sign up for my weekly newsletter, Friday Focus, to keep in touch. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.